Kind Old Lady Shelters, 15 Hells Angels. During a snowstorm, next day, 100 bikes. Line up at her door. Before we dive into today's story, please press the subscribe button. Also, drop a comment from which city you're watching. We love hearing where our community is tuning in from. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The blizzard on Interstate 25 was relentless, turning the world into a white void that swallowed everything in its path. Inside the weathered walls of Mountain Rose Diner, Elena Martinez counted her last $38 with trembling fingers. The foreclosure notice beneath the cash register reminded her that she had exactly 5 days left before losing everything she and her beloved husband had built together. At 62 years old, Elena had weathered many storms. But this one felt different. This one felt final. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the small diner that had been her sanctuary and her burden for the past 18 years. The red vinyl booths sat empty, their surfaces worn smooth by countless travelers who had found warmth and comfort within these walls. Elena moved slowly around the deserted dining room, her footsteps echoing off the checkered linoleum floor. The coffee pot gurgled weakly, half full of the bitter brew that had been sitting there since late afternoon. It was nearly 9 o'clock now, and she hadn't seen a customer in over 4 hours. She paused at booth number 6, Miguel's favorite spot. Even 3 years after the heart attack took him, she could still see him sitting there, his warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners when he laughed. They had bought this place together 20 years ago with nothing but hope and the small insurance settlement from her father's accident. "We'll make something beautiful here, mi amor," Miguel used to say, his voice filled with the optimism that had carried them through lean times and good ones alike. "This place will be a refuge for weary souls, a home for those who need one. Now." The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, threatening to go dark just like everything else in her world. The heating system wheezed and groaned, fighting a losing battle against the mountain cold that seeped through every crack and crevice. Elena pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked back to the counter where the foreclosure notice seemed to mock her with its official letterhead and cold, impersonal language. The diner's CB radio crackled weakly in the corner, its antenna bent from years of neglect and harsh weather. Once, that radio had been their lifeline to the trucking community, a constant stream of voices sharing road conditions, warnings about speed traps, and the occasional joke to break up the monotony of long hauls. Now it mostly sat silent. Another relic of better times when the diner had been a beacon of hope on this desolate stretch of highway. Elena opened the register again, counting the money one more time, as if the numbers might magically change through. Sheer force of will, they didn't. $38 wouldn't even cover the utility bill, let alone the 4 months of back payments the bank demanded. She'd already sold Miguel's tools, her grandmother's jewelry, everything of value they'd accumulated over their 26 years of marriage. This diner was all she had left, the last tangible piece of the life they'd built together. The wind picked up outside, shaking the building so violently that the old neon sign buzzed and flickered like a dying firefly through the frost-covered window. She could see the snow piling up against the gas pumps, burying them under white drifts that looked like tombstones in the pale light. Interstate 25 was completely invisible now, lost beneath the storm's fury. Elena glanced at the clock above the coffee machine. 9:20. Time to close up, flip the sign to closed, and admit defeat. Tomorrow, she would call the lawyer, maybe see if she could work out some kind of payment plan, though she knew it was hopeless. The bank had been patient enough, extending deadlines twice already. There would be no third chance. She was reaching for the light switch when she heard it, a low rumble that cut through the howling wind like thunder rolling across the mountains. At first, she thought it might be a snowplow finally making its way up the highway, but the sound was different, deeper, more rhythmic, like the heartbeat of some massive steel beast. Elena pressed her face to the window, squinting through the swirling snow. At first, she saw nothing but an endless wall of white. Then, slowly, shapes began to emerge from the storm. Headlights, many of them, cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Beneath the lights, she could make out the distinctive silhouettes of motorcycles, big ones, Harley-Davidsons by the look of them. The rumble grew louder as the bikes approached, their engines revving against the wind in a symphony of power and defiance. Elena counted 15 machines in total, all riding in tight formation despite the treacherous conditions that had shut down the interstate to all other traffic. As they pulled into the diner's parking lot, their headlights swept across the windows, like spotlights, filling the empty dining room with harsh white light that made Elena squint and step back. Her heart began to pound against her ribs as she took in the sight of these unexpected visitors. These were not ordinary motorcycle enthusiasts out for a weekend ride. Even through their heavy winter gear, she could see the patches and colors that marked them as members of something far more serious. These men, and they were all men, she could tell even through their leather and denim, looked like something out of a nightmare, or perhaps a movie about outlaw bikers. The lead rider dismounted first, a tall man with broad shoulders who seemed to command the others without saying a word. He looked toward the diner, and Elena could feel the weight of his gaze even through the frosted glass. Slowly, deliberately, he began walking toward the front door, his boots crunching through the snow with determined steps. Elena's hand hovered over the light switch. She could turn off the lights, lock the door, pretend the diner was closed for the night. These men wouldn't know the difference. They would probably just move on, find somewhere else to wait out the storm, somewhere that wasn't her responsibility or her problem. But as the man approached the door, she noticed something that stopped her cold. He was limping, favoring his left leg with each step. Behind him, the other riders were dismounting, and she could see that several of them were struggling against exhaustion and cold. They had been riding in this storm for hours, maybe longer. They were desperate for shelter, for warmth, for basic human compassion. The man reached the door and paused, his gloved hand hovering over the handle. Through the glass, Elena could see his face clearly now. He was older than she had expected, maybe 50, with gray streaking through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years on the road. His beard was frosted with ice, and his eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter sky, held the weight of someone who had seen too much and done things he couldn't take back. But there was something else in those eyes, something that gave Elena pause. Exhaustion, yes, and desperation, but also a kind of weary respect that she recognized all too well. This was a man who knew what it meant to be at the mercy of strangers, who understood the weight of asking for help. He knocked. 3 gentle raps that somehow managed to be both respectful and urgent. Elena looked back at the $38 on the counter, then at the foreclosure notice, then at the man waiting in the storm. Miguel's voice echoed in her memory. A refuge for weary souls, mi amor, a home for those who need one. She walked to the door and turned the lock. The moment Elena opened the door, the full force of the storm hit her like a physical blow. Snow swirled into the diner and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The man standing on her threshold was covered head to toe in ice and snow, his leather jacket frozen stiff, his beard white with frost. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from the cold and probably decades of cigarettes. "I know this is an imposition, but we've been riding for 14 hours straight. The highway's completely shut down about 15 miles back, and we're not going to make it much further in this weather." Behind him, Elena could see the others dismounting from their motorcycles, and her breath caught in her throat. These weren't ordinary bikers. The leather jackets bore unmistakable patches. The Death's Head logo, the winged skull, the words Hell's Angels, emblazoned across broad shoulders and backs. 15 of them, all massive men with arms like tree trunks, faces weathered by years of hard living and the kind of presence that made ordinary people cross to the other side of the street. The leader was easily 6'3", with salt and pepper, hair pulled back in a ponytail and a gray beard that reached his chest. Tattoos covered every visible inch of his arms, intricate designs that told stories Elena didn't want to know. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jawline, and his eyes held the weight of someone who had seen violence and been shaped by it. Behind him, the others looked like they had stepped out of a documentary about motorcycle gangs. One had a shaved head covered in tattoos, including a spider web on his neck that seemed to crawl in the flickering light. Another sported a mohawk despite being well into his 50s, with arms so heavily muscled they strained the seams of his leather jacket. The youngest couldn't have been more than 25, but he carried himself with the swagger of someone trying to prove he belonged with these dangerous men. His eyes darted nervously around the parking lot, as if expecting trouble to emerge. From the storm at any moment, every instinct screamed at Elena to close the door, to lock it, to call the police. These men looked like they could tear her diner apart with their bare hands and probably had done worse to people who had crossed them. The patches on their jackets weren't decorations. They were warnings, advertisements of violence and lawlessness that most civilized people would never understand. But then she saw something that gave her pause. Despite their intimidating appearance, they stood respectfully in the snow, waiting for her answer. None of them pushed forward or tried to force their way in. The leader kept his hands visible, his posture non-threatening despite his size, and there was something in his eyes, exhaustion, yes, but also a kind of desperate hope that she recognized all too well. "How many of you are there?" Elena asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it spoken aloud. 15, the man replied. "I'm Jack Sullivan. We're part of the Desert Thunder chapter heading back from a memorial service down in Albuquerque. We've got cash for food and coffee, and we won't cause any trouble. We just need somewhere warm to wait out the storm." Elena looked past Jack at the group of men removing their helmets. They were a terrifying sight: beards, tattoos, scars that told stories of violence and hard living, hands that looked like they could crush bone, faces that had seen the wrong side of too many fights. But she also saw something else: exhaustion. That went bone deep, the kind that came from fighting the elements for hours on end. These men, dangerous as they might be, were at the end of their rope. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "All of you." The relief on Jack's face was immediate and profound. "Thank you," he said simply. "You have no idea what this means." The Hells Angels filed in one by one, stomping snow off their boots and shaking ice from their jackets. They were massive men, most of them, the kind who had learned to take up space in the world through necessity and reputation. Their leather jackets creaked as they moved, the patches and pins catching the diner's fluorescent light. Chapter names, ranks, badges that marked territory and allegiances in a world Elena had never been part of. But despite their fearsome appearance, they moved carefully in the small diner, conscious of their size and respectful of the space they had been given. The one with the mohawk actually held the door for the youngest member, and Elena caught several of them wiping their boots extra clean before stepping onto her floor. "Find seats wherever you can," Elena told them, moving behind the counter. "I'll get some coffee going." The men settled into the booths and counter stools with obvious gratitude, their frozen leather creaking as they moved. Up close, Elena could see the details that the storm had hidden: the intricate artwork of their tattoos, the careful maintenance of their patches, the way they instinctively arranged themselves so that the older, more senior members took the best spots while the younger ones deferred without being asked. The young one, Elena heard someone call him Ricky, sat near the window, still shivering despite the warmth of the diner. An older man with intricate, Tattoos covering both arms and Sergeant at Arms, embroidered beneath his chapter patch, took the stool closest to the counter, nodding respectfully when Elena made eye contact. "Haven't seen weather like this in years," Jack said, settling onto a stool near the register. His jacket hung open now, revealing more patches. President in bold letters, service ribbons that suggested military background, and a small American flag pin that seemed oddly patriotic for someone society labeled an outlaw. Elena poured coffee into thick white mugs, the familiar ritual calming her nerves. "Sugar and cream are on the counter," she said. "Help yourselves." As the men warmed their hands on the hot mugs, Elena took stock of her situation. 15 Hells Angels, a nearly empty kitchen, and $38 to her name. These weren't the kind of men you wanted to disappoint or turn away hungry, but looking at their faces, weathered, tired, grateful for simple warmth, she realized that beneath the leather and patches and fearsome reputation, they were just human beings caught in a storm. By 11 o'clock, the storm had only gotten worse. The wind howled like a living thing, and the snow was falling so hard that the windows looked like they had been painted white. Jack's prediction about the highway being closed proved optimistic. According to the radio, Interstate 25 was shut down in both directions with no estimate for when it might reopen. "Could be tomorrow morning, could be 3 days," Jack told Elena as she refilled his coffee for the 4th time. "State Patrol's not even trying to clear it until the wind dies down." Elena nodded, doing mental calculations that didn't add up, no matter how she worked them. 15 men, possibly 3 days, virtually no food left in the kitchen. The last of the eggs and bacon were long gone, the hash browns nothing but a memory. She had managed to find a few cans of soup in the back storage room and some stale bread, but that wouldn't stretch far with men this size. Her $38 might buy enough groceries for one day if the roads were clear and the stores were open, which they weren't. The nearest grocery store was 15 miles away, and even if she could somehow make it through the storm, she doubted it would have enough supplies for this many people. The bikers had settled in for the night, some dozing in the booths, others playing cards with a worn deck that someone had produced from his jacket pocket. They had offered to pay for their meal, the pitiful soup and bread she had managed to cobble together, but Elena had waved them off. How could she charge them for scraps when they were stranded by circumstances beyond anyone's control? Ricky had fallen asleep with his head on the table, exhaustion finally overtaking him. He looked even younger in sleep, maybe 22 or 23, with the kind of face that belonged in a college classroom rather than on the back of a Harley. The sergeant at arms, a man called Bear, had draped his leather jacket over the kid's shoulders, a gesture so gentle it made Elena's throat tight. "He reminds me of my son," Bear explained quietly when he caught Elena watching. "Same age, same stubborn streak, always trying to prove he's tougher than he really is." "Where's your son now?" Elena asked. "Marines," Bear replied. "Second deployment. In Iraq. Comes home next month if all goes well." His voice carried the weight of a father's worry, the kind that never really went away, no matter how old your children got or how far they traveled from home. Elena poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, surveying her unexpected guests. In the harsh, fluorescent light, they looked less intimidating than they had when they first arrived. Their leather jackets hung over chair backs, revealing ordinary clothes underneath. Flannel shirts, worn jeans, work boots that had seen better days. These were working men, blue-collar guys who probably had more in common with her late husband than with the movie stereotypes she had expected. Jack approached the counter, his expression serious. "Elena, we need to talk about payment. You've been more than generous, but we can't just—" "Don't worry about it," Elena interrupted. "It's just food." "No, it's not," Jack said firmly. "It's hospitality, it's kindness, and it's costing you money. You probably don't have." Elena felt her cheeks flush. Was her financial situation that obvious? She tried to keep her voice steady. I managed just fine. Jack's eyes moved to the foreclosure notice sticking out from under the register, and Elena realized her attempt at discretion had failed. His expression softened with understanding that made her want to retreat behind the counter and pretend this conversation wasn't happening. "How long do you have?" he asked quietly. 5 days, Elena admitted, the words falling out of her mouth before she could stop them. "But that's my problem, not yours." "The hell it is," Jack said. "You opened your door to us when you didn't have to. You fed us when you couldn't afford to. That makes it our problem, too." Elena shook her head. "I appreciate the sentiment, but there's nothing you can do. I'm behind on 4 months of payments and the bank's not interested in sob stories." Jack's hands were wrapped around his coffee mug, his eyes looking straight through Elena. "Tell me about this place," he said. "How long have you owned it?" 18 years, Elena replied. "My husband Miguel and I bought it with insurance money. It was his dream, a place where travelers could find a hot meal and a friendly face. Sounds like he was a good man." "The best," Elena's voice caught. "He died 3 years ago. I've been trying to keep it running on memories and good intentions, but—" She gestured helplessly at the empty diner. "What if I told you that you've helped more people than you know?" Jack said. "What if I told you this place has probably saved lives?" Elena frowned. "I just served food. Miguel always said we were supposed to be a light for people, a beacon." Jack smiled. "Yeah, that's exactly what you are." Before she could ask what he meant, a commotion broke out. Bear was waking Ricky from a nightmare. "Sorry," Ricky mumbled. "Bad dreams. I'm lost on a dark highway. My bike's broken down and there's nowhere to go. No lights, no help, just endless darkness." He looked around the warm diner. "But then I wake up and I'm here and it's okay." Elena felt something shift in her chest. How many people had found refuge in this unlikely beacon she and Miguel had built? She looked at Jack. "What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing you won't figure out soon enough," he replied. "But right now we need to focus on practical matters. The bank wants 4 months of back payments?" 16,000, she admitted. "With fees, it's probably closer to 20. "That's serious money," Jack said. "More than I'll ever have," Elena said, her voice filled with resignation. "This place is finished." "No," Jack said, his voice sharp. "It's not time. Not for a place like this. Not for a woman like you." He stood up, pulling out his cell phone. "I'm going to make some calls." "Jack, don't you dare give up yet," he interrupted. "This story isn't over." As he walked out into the storm, Elena felt a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in months. When Jack returned nearly an hour later, the other bikers watched him, their glances suggesting they knew something she didn't. "Tomorrow morning," Jack said simply. "Maybe sooner." "What's tomorrow morning?" Elena asked. Jack just smiled. Bear then turned to Elena, studying her. "You know you look familiar." "I doubt that," she said. "I don't get out much. No, I'm serious. How long have you been running this place?" 18 years, she said. "Before that, Miguel and I lived in Denver. He drove long-haul truck, and I was his dispatcher." Bear snapped his fingers. "That's it. Frank Rodriguez. You saved Frank Rodriguez's life." Elena frowned. "I'm sorry, I don't—" "Big guy, black mustache," Bear said excitedly. "Drove for Mountain West Transport. This would have been maybe 14, 15 years ago. He was having chest pains. Pulled off right here at your diner." The memory of Frank, a trucker clutching his chest, hit Elena like a physical blow. "He's my brother," Bear said, grinning. "He says the angel of the mountains saved his life." Elena blushed. "It wasn't anything special." "No," Bear insisted. "Anyone wouldn't have. That's the point." Suddenly, the bikers were all sharing stories. Snake recalled how Elena had helped him when his daughter was in an accident, giving him directions and a sandwich. Another biker remembered how Elena and Miguel had helped him fix his bike during a snowstorm, refusing payment. Then Ricky, a nervous young man, spoke up. "You might not remember me," he whispered. 4 years ago, I was having a really bad time. I was riding west with no plan, no hope. I was thinking about ending it all. Elena's breath caught. "You served me a full meal, coffee, pie, even though I had no money," Ricky said, his eyes tearing up. "You told me that sometimes not knowing where you're going is the first step to finding where you belong. Then you gave me a business card for a friend of yours in Phoenix." That job, Ricky explained, had changed his life. "You saved my life that day, Elena, not just by feeding me, but by reminding me that there were still good people in the world." The diner went silent. Elena was stunned. She had only ever seen herself as a woman who served food and tried to be decent. "There are more stories," Jack said quietly. "You've been a beacon on this highway for 18 years. You've touched more lives than you know." Elena sank onto a stool. "I just serve food." "Exactly," Bear said. "In a world that's gotten pretty indecent, that makes you special." Jack smiled. "The calls I made tonight were to people like Frank, people who remember this place, who owe you a debt." Just then, new lights appeared outside. "Or maybe tonight," he added. By dawn, the diner was the epicenter of a massive gathering. What started with 15 bikers had swelled into a crowd Elena couldn't have imagined. The lot was packed with dozens of motorcycles from chapters across the western United States. When word got out that Jack Sullivan's chapter was stranded, "Here," Bear explained, "every chapter within 500 miles started moving. The Angel of Highway 25 isn't just a trucker legend. Bikers know that name too." A massive man from the Oakland chapter, Big Tony Ramirez, approached. 25 years ago, you found me passed out in your parking lot. You called the ambulance, rode with me to the hospital, and let my old lady know I was alive. I owe you my life." The stories kept coming, each one a memory Elena had almost forgotten. Then Jack presented her with a thick envelope. $87,000, he announced to the crowd. "Cash from every chapter represented here." "This is too much," Elena protested, her hands trembling. "You keep this place running," Big Tony said, his voice firm. "You keep being the angel you've always been." Jack produced an architect's drawing. "We're setting up a protection detail. Nobody messes with this place or you ever. You're under Hell's Angels protection now." The CB radio crackled. "Breaker 19, this is Roadrunner calling for the Angel. We got 60 bikes rolling your way from Utah, ETA 45 minutes. Elena picked up the microphone, her voice trembling. "Roadrunner, this is Mountain Rose. The coffee's always hot, the door's always open, and there's always room for family." As the bikers rode out, Jack gave Elena one final envelope. Inside was a business card and a note from Frank. "This place will always be sacred ground to me." "You didn't see Hell's Angels last night," Jack said to her before leaving. "You just saw 15 people who needed help, and you opened your door. That's what started all of this. Your simple human decency." Elena felt Miguel's presence beside her. She walked back inside, past the envelope of cash and the bikers planning improvements, and picked up the microphone again. "Wanderer, this is Mountain Rose. Coffee's always hot, the door's always open, and there's always room for family." This story reminds us that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes in the world. When we open our hearts to strangers, we never know whose life we might save, or how that simple gesture of humanity might come back to save us in return.